Hi, hi, Professor. I would like to introduce myself. I am Elif Bilge.
Hello, nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you. My departments are psychology and sociology, and I finished second grade this year. I have been writing on PsiNossa for 4 months. And you can talk, Beste.
Okay, I also would like to introduce myself and to tell you about Turkish Psychology Students Working Group. I am Beste, a third grader psychology student. I am a member of the publishing team. Turkish Psychology
team.
Yes.
Okay.
I'll tell you more about it later. Turkish Psychology Students Working Group was established in 1995. The main purpose of us is to provide a network by bringing psychology students from Turkey and Turkish Republic of Northern Cyprus together, and to carry out various academic, social, and social responsibility activities that lead students to develop themselves. As an independent organization, we also work in cooperation with Turkish Psychologists Association. As the publishing team, we publish a journal called PsiNossa every month. PsiNossa is a semi-academic journal. Based on this, we've dreamed of publishing another journal called PsiNossa Plus with the motivation of those ahead of the road we've taken. And it's an honor to be here with you for the spring issue. Welcome again, and thank you for being here with us.
Welcome again. If you are ready, let's start the interview.
Okay.
First of all, we'd like to get to know you and learn a little about your career. How did you cross paths with psychology, and how did you decide to work in this area?
Well, actually, my decision to become a psychologist came very early when I was still in high school, before I went to college. The National Science Foundation here in the United States had summer programs in various topics for advanced high school students. And these were quite competitive to get into. I applied and I was accepted into a program in behavioral science, essentially Skinnerian psychology, which was held at Grinnell College in Iowa at the time. I was living with my parents in New Jersey, so I had to travel to Iowa, which at that time I had to take a bus. It took about 16 hours on the bus to get there. And then I spent 8 weeks studying behavioral science. The program was called the Behavior Science Institute, and I was quite captivated by it, and returned for each of the next 5 summers as an assistant in the program. I gradually became an instructor, and so pretty early on, I became introduced to psychology, and I started teaching psychology, and I've been doing it ever since. And it's kind of curious that you asked to do this interview this year, 2021, because this year is the 50th anniversary of the first couple of papers that I wrote about Pavlovian conditioning.
50th anniversary.
50th anniversary.
Oh my God. Congratulations.
So I've been studying Pavlovian conditioning for 50 years. Now, if you would let me share my screen, I will show you a couple of slides that you might find entertaining. Let's see if I can find them. Okay, here we go. So these two papers, backward conditioning as an inhibitory procedure, that was published in 1971. I was a graduate student at McMaster University at that time. My supervisor was Shepard Siegel. And so we published that paper, and then same year we published a paper on condition suppression following CS pre-exposure, which was about the latent inhibition effect. So that's what makes this the 50th anniversary. And here is a picture of me about 50 years ago. And this is a more recent picture. And you can see that some things have changed. I don't have as much hair as I used to. And I put on a little bit of weight. But some things have not changed. I still have glasses. And I still have a mustache. And that is also true about the study of Pavlovian conditioning. This is a diagram that you have probably all seen, right?
1,000 times, probably.
Yeah. Bestasu, you say you saw this when you were learning about Pavlovian conditioning?
Yes.
I know. Elif, I don't know if the others of you have seen this. And it shows that Pavlov's dog salivates in response to food before training, before conditioning. And Pavlov's dog does not salivate to a bell before conditioning. And then you pair a bell with food. And after a number of such pairings, the dog salivates when you ring the bell, right? Is everybody familiar with that?
Of course.
So this diagram has been with us for about 50 years. And so I recently asked the question whether this diagram is... so this is one of the things that have stayed the same for 50 years. But has Pavlovian conditioning changed during that time? And the answer is yes. I recently wrote an article which focused on this diagram, and it asked the question, what's wrong with this picture? And my answer was just about everything. So there's a lot that has changed in Pavlovian conditioning over the years, but not all of that, of course, is dribbled down to the level of introductory psychology textbooks and so on. So that's a bit of my background.
Thank you for sharing.
Thank you. You have been involved in academic life for many years. What challenges have you faced on this long road? What suggestions would you like to make to young people in their early academic careers?
Well, that's a pretty weighty question. And my answer to that question today is very different from what my answer might have been just 3 or 4 years ago. There have been universities for hundreds of years in major centers of learning all around the world. So a university as an institution of higher education is a very old institution. And of course, along with universities, there have been professors during all those hundreds of years. And the way in which professors worked stayed pretty much the same for hundreds of years. They basically did a lot of studying themselves. They became an expert in a particular topic, and then they tried to teach students and share their expertise with their students. Well, the basic elements of that will remain in the future. But how the sharing of expertise occurs and how universities are organized is undergoing a lot of change in many places. And I don't know what it's going to be like to be a professor 10 years from now, 20 years from now, 30 years from now. I mean, this coronavirus has drastically changed how professors interact with students. Before the coronavirus, you would not have thought to ask me for an interview using a Zoom kind of procedure. So all of a sudden, now that everything is over the internet and using Zoom, the world has shrunk. You could talk to American professors, and I can talk to students in Turkey. And next week, I'm going to be talking to students in South America. And that was not possible just 2 years ago, 3 years ago. So the way we deliver information is changing drastically, which means that the way we pay for information is also changing drastically. I am providing this discussion for you without charge. Now, if you can get instruction without paying for it, I think that's going to be more and more common. That is, I have a YouTube channel now. I didn't have a YouTube channel 5 years ago. I now have a YouTube channel, which is called Learning and Behavior, Key Concepts, that now has about 35 short lectures. And I was able to make those lectures because my salary is paid by the University of Texas. And I put them on YouTube, which means that now they're free for everybody to watch, which means that students are not having to pay tuition to watch those videos, which means that universities can reduce the number of teachers they have. They don't have to pay their teacher as many teachers because they can send the students to a YouTube channel, which means if they're not hiring as many teachers, not paying them as much. So it's going to drastically change the nature of higher education. And it's that impact is starting to happen. More than 50% of all instructional time for an undergraduate student at the University of Texas is provided by a professor who is not full-time and does not have tenure. 20 years ago, that was not the case. 20 years ago, that was maybe 10% of all instructional time. So who is a professor is changing. Professors used to be full-time people like me. I mean, I've dedicated my life to that. Now they're part-time people. And I have been employed as a professor at the University of Texas now for 49 years. That's going to be pretty rare. A lot of universities may not be here 49 years from now. And they have different so-called business models. So the world of higher education is in great turmoil. So my advice to students is hang in there and do the best you can. The next generation of professors is going to have a more difficult time than I did, unfortunately. It's a much more complicated world that students are transitioning into.
Okay.
Kind of depressing. Maybe you shouldn't ask me these questions.
No, we are grateful for your insight.
Thank you. It's a known fact that you enjoyed playing the viola. You are also working to explore the links between music and psychology in the Turtles and Pavlov project. How did music affect your perspective on psychology?
For many years, I thought you had to choose that you're either going to be a musician and you can't be a scientist, or you're going to be a scientist and you can't be a musician. And I had difficulty with that choice, and certainly in terms of having enough time to be an expert in your craft. Part-time musicians cannot become experts in their music, and part-time scientists can't become experts. So for about, I started out thinking that I would become a musician. I went to a music conservatory, the Juilliard School of Music, and I practiced 5 hours a day. I was on track to spend my life as a musician. And my parents were very unhappy about that because musicians have even greater difficulty making a living than professors do. So they were concerned that they would have to support me in my old age, and they didn't want to do that. So they wanted me to go into a career where I could support myself, and so that's why I became a professor. And I've always been very concerned about, how am I going to pay my bills this month? I was always concerned about, am I going to have enough money to live on, to pay my rent and buy my food and all that. So early on, I thought it was either or. But as I've gotten older, I've discovered that if you integrate the arts with the sciences, you actually improve the science. And one of the things that being involved in the arts and the music forces you to pay attention to, of course, is organization. And it's not just music which is disorganized is very unpleasant to listen to. Music that people enjoy is highly organized. Mozart, Beethoven, highly organized compositions. And they're organized, and how they are organized creates a sense of wonder. It creates a sense of beauty, and it enriches our lives. Well, in music, the elements that need to be organized are musical notes. In science, what needs to be organized are the data points, the observations, the numbers. And those have to be organized in order to create a science. A science is not just a collection of facts. A collection of facts is just a collection of facts. If I list all the names of everybody in the city of Ankara, that's a lot of information. But it's not science because the information is not organized. So scientists spend a lot of time organizing information, and the best scientists organize information in ways that are aesthetically pleasing, in ways that are beautiful. There's beauty that comes in how you design an experiment. There's beauty that comes in how you analyze and think about a scientific problem. And of course, there's beauty in how you write about it and talk about it, and how you present graphs and things like that. And the best scientists are very astutely aware, they're very keenly aware of the importance of beauty in their work. And as you try to think about integrating psychology and music, I think you become more focused on those sorts of issues. Also, towards the end, in recent years, when I started out, in 1970, there wasn't the psychology of music. I mean, listening to music, making music, thinking about music, experiencing the emotional impact of music, that's all psychology. And psychologists had not started looking at those kinds of issues. Now, the psychology of music is a big and vibrant and exciting area, specialization in psychology. So the integration of music and psychology is much easier today than it was when I was getting started.
Well,
does that make sense? I mean, are you going to be able to? Are you going to have trouble translating, or it's going to work out?
It's going to be fine. It was just like you said, sharing information and how you share it affects the observer, the viewer, the listener. We just we focused on you. That's why we look like. I also have some questions for you.
Sure.
You have studied Pavlovian conditioning from a functional point of view. We saw your papers.
Yes.
You're also the former president of the Pavlovian Society. How would you evaluate the point where the functional perspective on classical conditioning has come today?
Well, most of the people who study Pavlovian conditioning are interested in the behavioral and neural mechanisms that are involved in associating a conditioned stimulus with an unconditioned stimulus. So the vast majority of scientists in this field study mechanisms. Now, I pay attention to mechanisms, but I ask the question, what is this useful for? What is the purpose of this kind of learning? And how does it help animals and people in their interactions with the environment? And so that's what the functional perspective brings. And I've been arguing that it's important to think about these kinds of questions. I've been arguing that this is an important way to think about Pavlovian conditioning for a long time. And people say, oh yeah, that's important, that's interesting, but then they go on to study mechanisms. So the functional perspective is an important dimension to the study of Pavlovian conditioning, but it's certainly not the dominant one, and it's not what most people think about or most of the scientists work on. I think they acknowledge that it's an important question, but they prefer to work on their own kinds of questions, which often deal with mechanism. And the study of learning in general the study of a lot of aspects of psychology in general has moved towards the neurosciences. And so everybody's interested in neural mechanisms of emotion, neural mechanisms of memory, neural mechanisms of problem solving, decision making, neural mechanisms of every aspect of psychology. So, which actually is relevant to the previous question of what advice I might have for students who are entering this field. If the field is becoming so strongly biologically based that the next generation of psychologists have to be experts in neuroscience. Unfortunately, it's not my favorite thing to study, and I have done very little in that area. But the next generation of psychologists are going to have to, are already much more expert in neurosciences and neuroscience techniques than was the case 20 years ago, 30, 40 years ago.
Okay, thank you. You've been working on conditioning and learning for many years, 50 years we've learned today. You gave lessons, you wrote books. I actually studied one of your books, Essentials of Conditioning and Learning, translated by Hakan Çetinkaya.
Oh, look at that. I hadn't seen the cover of that book. I don't actually have a copy of that book. I'm glad you have one.
I really enjoyed it, and I want to personally thank you for sharing your information, your knowledge with us. But if we get back to you, how do you use this information to understand your behavior in everyday life, such as making decisions, etc.?
Oh, I am a die-hard behaviorist. And that's how I think about my own behavior. That's how I think about the behavior of people around me. I just look at the behavior. I don't think too much about people's explanations of why it is they do things. We about 95% of the things that we do automatically. We don't think about it. We just do it. You get up in the morning, you put on your socks, you put on your shoes, you brush your teeth, you make your coffee, you drink your coffee, you grab a cup and have a sip. You're not thinking about it. You're just doing it. And so my personal view is that most of what we do is not a result of making decisions. It's not a result of thinking carefully about what is the best way to do things. What's the best way to make coffee? You don't think about that. You do it the way you did it yesterday. Now we like to think that people are rational, they're reasonable, they are thoughtful, and they carefully think about what they're going to do and then decide what's the best course of action. That we like to think that about human beings. I don't think that's how human beings work. And I think people, if you ask them, why did you do that? If you ask somebody, why'd you do that? There's a social requirement to come up with a reasonable explanation. And so we make up a story as to why we chose to have chocolate cake instead of vanilla cake. Okay. But in fact, the explanation we provide for our own behavior is just a story. And it may have very little to do with what actually determines our behavior. So I tend to observe behavior very carefully and see a lot of details in how individuals behave. Like I was in a Zoom meeting yesterday, which is kind of, and one of the participants started kind of rocking back and forth, and I was fascinated by that. Why were they doing that? Often people don't even see those behaviors. In my classes, a student will go like this, and I think they're about to raise their hand. So just before they get to their head, I call on them, and they're confused. They say, well, "Why'd you call on me?" Because I saw your hand move, and I'm paying attention to those kinds of things, which for most people, you kind of ignore that. So how this affects me personally is I pay a lot of attention to behavior. I don't pay very much attention to what people say about their behavior. And I look at, how their behavior is a function of schedules of reinforcement, stimulus control, Pavlovian signaling, and all of those sorts of things. And it's everywhere. I mean, that's just how I see the world. And one of the things I try to do when I teach my learning class is I try to get students to recognize all of these conditioning principles in their own personal daily lives. And some of them make considerable progress in being able to recognize cases of Pavlovian conditioning or conditioned inhibition or extinction or all of these phenomena in their personal interactions with the world and with other people.
The beauty of.
So I wouldn't be the same person if I weren't a behavioral psychologist. I mean, being a behavioral psychologist permeates how I operate. It's not a hobby. It's changed the way I see the world.
Okay. You took part in the Global Classroom Project, which was conducted in collaboration between Anchor University and the University of Texas. What do you think this project has to do with both parties' students, and what kind of experience was it for you?
Oh, I love this global exchange program on a number of dimensions. I've greatly enjoyed getting to know students in Turkey, and many of those students are much more serious than the students I have here in Austin, Texas. I always have some excellent students, but then I have students who are just filling in time and trying to get credit and don't really care about the whole uproar. And they think conditioning is so esoteric and why study it? And how could it possibly be relevant to my life? And they don't recognize what a special education they're actually getting. I mean, they see my name as an author in the book, but they don't quite know what that means. And no one, all the time I've been teaching this class, none of my students have ever asked me to autograph a copy of their book. But if I visit Turkey and interact with students, they all want to have my photograph taken. They all want me to write a comment in their book, and they seem to value and appreciate that I have something special to offer. Students at home don't think I'm special. I'm just one of the somebody else they have to cope with to finish their undergraduate degree. And one of the important benefits to the Texas students is that if since Texas students see the students from Turkey, it shows them that the material they're studying is of worldwide interest. It shows them that this is important, not just in Austin, Texas. It's important lots of other places. And so I think the international connection helps to communicate the significance of the information in useful ways. And otherwise, it's just fun for me. I mean, it makes teaching a different kind of activity. If you do the same thing over and over again, week after week, it gets a little boring. But if you see the name of somebody you can't pronounce, or someone who can't quite speak English correctly, or people who have a very different style of dress, for example, and so on, it makes it much more interesting. And it broadens the perspective of Texas students. I mean, a lot of these Texas students have never been outside the state of Texas. So they haven't even been to Louisiana or New York or Los Angeles or Washington, D.C. I mean, they're in the United States and in a very relatively small geographical area in the United States. So for many of them, one of the more interesting lessons was, why is Turkey such an important country? And how is the importance of Turkey related to its geographical position? At the east end of the Mediterranean, and critical shipping lanes and trade routes and so forth and so on. This is all news to students in Texas, and we have to. We live in a global world now. It's successful people have to be aware of lots of what's happening away from their own home. I mean, the coronavirus is a prominent example. You have to be aware of what's happening away from home, because some disease could travel and cause a lot of damage. So these international connections, I think, are going to become more and more important.
You can go on, Elif.
So let's move on to the next question.
Okay.
Is there a message you would like to give to psychology students who will watch and read this interview?
Who will watch this interview? Well, one message is, hi, and thank you for tuning in. And the fact that you are watching this interview means that you are serious about your studies. And I applaud you for how serious you are about becoming an expert psychologist, and I wish you the best of luck in that journey.
Okay. Is there anything you'd like to add?
Anything I would like to add? Well, since I'm celebrating my 50th year studying Pavlovian conditioning, I've been thinking about what I might have done differently in how I went about conducting my science. And a big part of being a scientist is to select the problem that you want to study. And right from the beginning, I thought the best approach is to think of a problem to investigate that no one else has studied yet, because then you're going to be the first one to study that and you will become famous. Well, and so a lot of the things that I have been studying and the questions that I've asked have been questions that other people have not asked. Well, there's something kind of interesting in the scientific community, and that is each scientist selects some problem that they're studying, and they become then the world expert on that research question. And they don't have time to study the questions that are unrelated to what they're studying. So if you select a research question to study that nobody else is studying, nobody is going to read your work. So another approach is to work on a problem that lots of people are working on. Just find a new angle, find something critical that they've missed, but work on a problem that lots of people are working on. And chances are your work will be much more widely disseminated. So that's one of the things I've been thinking about recently. But we do need pioneers. We do need people studying things that no one else has thought to study. But if you go down that road, it becomes more of a challenge to get people to become interested in what you're studying. Anyway, it's an interesting kind of trade-off. The major factor that people used to pay attention to in judging whether someone is a prominent scientist is the number of experiments they have done and number of publications they have written and so on. With changes in how information is disseminated, and now the emphasis is on not the number of things you've written, but the number of people who've read what you've written. And it used to be very difficult to find out how many people read what you wrote. Now it's very easy because everything is downloaded and you can count the number of downloads. So in thinking about a career in science, you now have to think a little bit more about the number of downloads, which I never had to worry about before. So the world is changing in interesting ways, and in ways that actually will influence how science is conducted. I mean, talking about this global educational interchange, one of the things that's really exciting new development in science is now you can conduct experiments on the World Wide Web and recruit participants from countries and places that are far away. So there are more and more of these international studies that include people answering questionnaires and participating in experiments that now have a cross-cultural dimension. You can compare people in China doing this experiment versus Japan versus India versus Africa versus South America and so on. And you end up with these huge experiments with more than 10,000 participants. That was never possible before. To be able to do that, you have to establish connections with faculty members and scientists in all these other countries, and then collaborate with them. So the number of international research collaborations is increasing exponentially, and that's hugely important and exciting way in which psychology is developing. Now, psychology used to be mostly the problems of rich people in Vienna who had the money to talk to Sigmund Freud, which is a very small sample. Now, psychology now is moved way beyond Vienna and way beyond rich people. And that's really important, because we need to understand how psychology works at all levels of income and in all societies. So, and now we have a chance to expand our science to include all that, which is pretty unique. It's a new opportunity. It's a new world. So best of luck doing that. You're going to be the ones doing it, not me. I'm close to retirement.
Thank you very much for your time. And thank you on behalf of our publishing team. We are very pleased to meet you.
It's my pleasure. And if you write up all of this, it's going to be a long article.
It's going to be fantastic. And we will send it to you.
So feel free to leave things out. You might send me a copy when it's finished. I'd be curious to see it.
Thank you so much.
My pleasure.
Have a nice evening.
Take care. You have a nice evening.